Here in the studio, someone who describes themselves as a former extremist, Islamic extremist, Deen, who now works to counter terrorism at the Quilliam Foundation, alongside journalist Yasmin Alabai-Brown, Muslim as well. So two people from what we're calling the Muslim community. Adam, is there a Muslim community that is not doing enough to crack down on extremism?
The Muslim community at large would all condemn ISIS. They'd all condemn these acts that we've just witnessed, these horrific acts. But the problem that I see is that, yes, ISIS is fringe, but the Muslim communities share a broad spectrum of beliefs that are also shared by the likes of ISIS as well.
What radicalised you? What made you an extremist?
What radicalised me was that I was in my sort of late teens. I had a curiosity of Islam, and I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I bumped into Islamist extremists. They presented to me Islam in this kind of over-politicised sense, which was actually hijacked by Islamism.
Just listen to anyone listening to Kim and Phil Dick just there, and Piers was asking Phil towards the end of the interview, what can we do? He said, we've got to stop glamorising. You know, it's presented as glamorous. This idea of this fundamentalist view of Islam. Is that what's happening with these young people?
I mean, what was interesting in that interview, that very emotional interview, and Piers asked the question, you know, what was the mindset of this person? How can we make sense of it? And as a former extremist, I actually understand that mindset.
Yeah.
And these acts that we just witnessed, it makes perfect sense to me as a former extremist.
Why?
I understand why. Because there is this...
How can killing and maiming thousands of children make any sense to anybody?
And it's important that we understand that mindset, from top to bottom.
I'm really struggling, so explain to me.
You see, what you have to understand is that this pernicious ideology separates the world in good and evil. It pits the individual, the extremist, against everybody else and dehumanises everybody that is non-Muslim and also Muslims that disagree with this individual.
But in his head, how is this guy justifying what he's doing?
He believes, and this is very important, he actually believes that he is serving God. He's actually doing good in the world. That's very important to understand.
And what in Islam says that that's OK?
If we look at the core message of Islam, this is completely in contradiction. However, we can trace back these types of acts to medieval theological discussions, to an Islamic heritage that may support these acts. And these are the things that we need to challenge.
All right, Yasmin.
Well, there is no Muslim community. There is not. I'm a Shia Muslim. If you look at who has been doing all of this, you will not find many Shias doing it. So first of all, let's get away from this idea of a monolithic community. There are two things, I think, and I think this is very important. The mindset. There is a madness in the heads of a lot of Muslims, has been for a long time. There's a boil and a bubble and a toxicity which is then open to the kind of stuff that we've just heard. And we're not looking at the psychological condition, which I think comes partly from not belonging, being told not to belong by their families, politics, failures, whatever. But the most important thing is this, and we're not talking about it. Donald Trump went and shook the hands of the King of Saudi Arabia. The source of all of this is Wahhabism, a version of Islam that the Wahhabis have been importing for 20 years. It's in our schools, in schools in our streets, in mosques, and they're our best friends. How are we going to tackle this if we don't tackle the source?
Let me put this to you. We had a lot of debate yesterday about this. It's very contentious. If you even go there, you know, you immediately get vilified. But there's a reality check here, isn't there? You're right to say there's not one Muslim community, because there are disparate groups, very opposing groups within that community. But they are all joined by one common thing, which is Islam. And the extremist view is a very warped, twisted view of Islam, designed to support and justify their nefarious behaviour and their extreme violence.
But I'm saying the extremism comes from a particular form of Wahhabism.
Right, I get that. I agree with you. I agree with you. My point, though, is in terms of how we deal with this, how we root out the radicalised young people that right now in this country...
No, you don't work on the radicalisation of the young people. You work at the source. You ban, however much we need Saudi Arabia's business, you ban them from opening mosques and schools in our country. You ban it. This is the source. I mean, would we allow any other outside force to come in and brainwash our children?
I would agree with Yasmin here. I think Wahhabism has been an immense menace in this society. And stop all funding from Saudi Arabia in terms of supporting this horrible, horrible interpretation of Islam. And also, I will also add that it's not just Wahhabism. Let's not make that mistake. There is a puritanical type of interpretation of Islam that is outside of Wahhabism, which also needs to be addressed. What we need to do with young people to protect young Muslim minds is to inoculate them from this extremist propaganda.
But Yasmin, is enough being done? I use the phrase community, but let's make it disparate communities, right? Yeah. Are enough Muslims raising alarm bells when they see unusual behaviour? And the reason I say that, if you take this guy, Salman al-Bedi...
His mum did, didn't she?
His mum was concerned. The father was a fighter back in Libya.
The imam was concerned.
Right, you know, the imam in his local mosque 2 years ago said he looked at him with hate in his eyes when he criticised ISIS.
So people did express concern.
So
nothing was done.
Yeah, but what did they do with that concern? Does the Muslim community then call the police? You know, the Trevor Phillips programme that came out a few months ago was quite terrifying, actually, to any impartial observer. He had no axe to grind either way, about the sheer number of people who are in this country, in the Muslim communities, let's use a plural, right, who are tacit supporters of a lot of this action, believing it's justified revenge for what is going on in the Middle East, and are actually afraid to get involved with any authority in this country. So this idea of reporting it might be anathema to many people in the Muslim community.
Again, it goes back to the Wahhabism. The Wahhabis are not just getting the young people. They've got into the heads of the grandfathers and the grandmothers and the mothers. So when I see, I'm sorry, when I see a little girl of 4 covered up, that is the sign of how the cultural colonisation has taken place. And if that's the bedrock, you can imagine how things get built on it.
But again, final point on this. Are enough Muslims doing enough, saying what you're saying in public forums to try and change the thinking?
I think Muslim organisations and institutions are obstructing this method of reporting these suspicious individuals to the police. There is a problem of victimhood that is being pushed by these organisations, these figureheads, that we need to address.
Is it also fear, Yasmin? I mean, are there people in the Muslim communities in this country just fearful of retribution themselves if they try and stand up to this?
And they need to break out. And remember, this didn't happen before. Funnily enough, when people came in the 40s and 50s, you didn't have this closed-off community. You didn't have this idea that you could live like, I don't know, Nubians within the desert, within a nation. We didn't have that. But yes, there is self-protection, there's fear. I mean, I get ostracised, you get ostracised for being treacherous and traitors. That has to stop.
Listen, thank you both. I mean, the one thing to really, again, reinforce, of course, many Muslims in that audience, so they were targets as well.
We've seen Kate talking to some
more
of them
Muslims
this morning.
are killed by ISIS than any other group in the world. And also, of course, all the people rushing to help, doctors, nurses, police, fire, ambulance, taxi drivers. A lot of them were Muslims as well. So Muslims are not only targets, they were heroes, but this Muslim that perpetrated it is an evil that has to be eliminated from this country.
And we're talking about that throughout the programme this morning. Thank you both very much indeed. Let's catch